Is this you? Are you being buried under an avalanche of paperwork? Are you a safety data hoarder? Now, realistically, what I see a lot of times during an audit, people will freak out and I can't find my documentation. I don't know where my documentation is. It doesn't have to be like that. Honest. One of the biggest problems I find with health and safety is that people don't know how to manage their documentation and paperwork. So what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to show you and talk about 5 principles for health and safety data management. Doesn't matter if it's old school paper or if it is electronic data, it doesn't really matter. These principles apply. So stick around and we'll talk about it, okay? Now, the very first thing that you need to understand is you need to have good data structure. It doesn't matter if it's files in a file folder or if it is electronic. You need to have a good file structure and you need to make it hierarchical. So, God, that's a hard word. Anyway, you need to make sure that everything pertains to what the master file is. So if you're looking after incident investigations, everything should be in the same pile for all incident management, whether it be incident reports, the investigation records, etc. So you need to actually consider a good file structure. What do you need to capture? So consider, what are your compliance requirements? What is it you're required to retain by the legislation? What are you creating according to the legislation? The next thing you want to consider is your occupational health and safety management system. I did a video earlier on the health and safety management systems and the required elements, so I suggest you have a look at it.
Can you send me the link, please?
Yeah, there'll be a link below. So have a look at that. But what you need to do is consider those elements. So, like, for instance, you have to have health and safety policy, you have to have hazard assessments, you have to have incident investigation, emergency response, all of those different elements. So why don't you create a file system based on those elements? I know you'd think pretty easy, right?
Easy peasy.
The next thing, you're busy trying to capture all of the records of the health and safety activities. So manage that stuff and make sure it's captured and put exactly where it's supposed to be. Now, the next thing you need to do, and what a lot of people forget, when they're doing this, they think, hey, we'll just get everything all piled in at once. No. Don't. Okay? Build new, then move old. Okay? A lot of people do it, and what happens is they end up with a mishmash and a train wreck because they're doing both and combining and ending up with duplication and corruption. So build new and then port old over, okay? Pretty easy process. As far as it goes with health and safety documents, wow, look, cool. Well, we'll talk more about him in a bit. But as it is with health and safety documents, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't streamline their data. There's way too many forms. Like, for instance, incident investigations. This is my huge pet peeve, or incident reports, I mean. Got to report an incident. Well, was it a near miss or close call? Did it involve a contractor? Those are different forms. Was there a person injured? That's a different form. For goodness sakes, one form. Put some check boxes in, okay? So, are there too many forms? The next thing is you need to collect just what is needed. Don't collect too much. Honestly, people start to collect and create too much data where they don't need to. The next thing, figure out compliance first, performance second. Okay? So once again, what are you required to collect according to the jurisdiction you're in and the legislation? Then the next thing is you want to make sure that you're going to capitalize on the data you're collecting so that you can create lagging and leading indicators. Well, the lagging indicators are the data you're collecting, but you can create leading indicators and capitalize on it, because one of the things you want to do is ensure that your records validate your return on investment.
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is, are you keeping records so that you'll get a return? Are you going to be looking at, hopefully, a reduction in injuries, a reduction in WCB premiums, a reduction in insurance premiums? That's how you gain a return on investment with health and safety. Pretty easy principle, really, when you get right down to it. Now, the next thing you have to consider is when people are creating documents, they have this notion that they should last forever, I think, or we need to retain them forever. You don't need to retain them forever. What you do need is you need to determine what the life cycle is or how long you're keeping documents. So What you need to do is establish a document lifecycle. Every document needs a beginning and it needs an end. Okay, so for instance, incident management. Obviously, the incident report becomes the beginning document, but where does it end? What creates the end or the termination of that life cycle? So, for instance, we have an incident report, and that goes through, and obviously it's going to go through the process of being received by whoever, and then an incident investigation is going to ensue. There's going to be conclusions drawn. There's going to be corrective actions recommended, and there's going to be corrective actions implemented. The Health and Safety Committee might look at it and sign it off for QA or make additional recommendations. So what is that life cycle? What does it look like? Are there inherited documents off of that document that's been created? Say, for instance, partway through the incident investigation, as part of the concluding documentation, there might be corrective actions that require the maintenance department or the operations department to do something. So are there inherited documents that come off of that or subsequent documents? What does that process look like? If they're paper, are they just stapled together? Is a work order stapled to it? Or if it's electronic, does it attach to and point to another piece of documentation? So that part has to be outlined. Now, the next thing is, when is it fulfilled? When have we said that, okay, everything is done? Is the incident investigation closed once the Health and Safety Committee looks at it? Is it closed once the CEO signs off on it? What is fulfillment and when does it occur? And then the next thing is how long does that thing stay active on active file until it's archived? And of course, there's got to be an archival process. A lot of times people will say that it stays on file for the life of the company or whatever. That's totally up to you. Figure out the process, but make sure it's mapped out, documented, and everybody understands it. It becomes this huge issue that people, I don't know, for some reason, it becomes a difficult thing, and I don't know why. It doesn't have to be that difficult. On that note, the next thing we have to talk about is responsibility and accountability framework. Who's responsible for each phase of the life cycle? So, for instance, I have incidents on the brain. So, for example, we'll go back to the incident report. Okay, so obviously the person who submitted the incident report is going to have a responsibility for either tucking it into the interoffice envelope and sending it on its way, or clicking the submit button on the file. Whatever the case may be, that's their responsibility. But then who does it go to and what's their responsibility? How do they demonstrate accountability? What's their accountability for the process? If a manager receives it, are they supposed to read it, vet it, and then send it off to the Health and Safety Department or the Health and Safety Committee? What is their next step and what's their accountability? Say, for instance, too, when the Health and Safety Committee gets it, what's their accountability? What are the duties or responsibilities that they have to that document? Each phase needs to have their responsibilities and, of course, the accountability mapped. And everybody has to be assured of it. It doesn't matter if it happens through paper or if it happens electronically. Now, on the note of it being paper, what you want to do is avoid copy purgatory. The same thing goes with electronic too, of course. When you're making copy upon copy upon copy, you end up with file corruption. Doesn't matter if it's paper or electronic, because what is the source of truth? The source of truth is the original document or the original file that was created. But if we have all of these copies floating around, then we end up with corruption. And we don't want that because it complicates matters. So whatever you do, don't end up with copy purgatory. Now, the next thing, one of the endpoints is archiving your data. When you're creating that data archive, it should be identical to whatever file structure you started off with. I know you'd think that would be simple too, right? But it isn't. Time and time again, whether you're undergoing a safety audit or whatever the case may be, if you've moved that file from active to archive, it should move to a corresponding folder so it's easy to find, whether that's electronic or if you're putting it in banker's boxes or whatever the case and down in your catacombs and basement. Talk about that in just a sec. Create your archiving conventions and make sure that everybody's aware of them, whether they be electronic and within your system or consider offsite backups. Now, the other thing to consider with this, if you're moving to an electronic process, all of these pieces that I talked about, you should make sure that you're looking for a vendor that uses these same principles. Because honestly, when you get right down to it, if you're looking after your data, it's going to identify and help you reduce overall risk. That's an absolute for sure. As sure as I'm standing here, your data helps you reduce your risk. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This little guy again? What are you doing here? You know what? I'm going to talk about him in just a sec. But just to summarize everything, sort of what I've talked about, create your file structure. Okay, figure out what you need to collect and create a file structure that's going to be ongoing and you don't have to change it. Then port old to new. Streamline and refine your data that you're collecting. You likely don't need to collect as much as you need to collect, but make sure you're collecting enough for compliance, that it matches your health and safety or your health and safety management system, and that you can use it as evidence should you need to do things like get statistics and look at leading and lagging indicators, looking at hopefully predicting return on investment such as reduced claims, reduced costs through premiums, etc. As far as your document lifecycle and retention goes, an archival process, you want to make sure that it's mapped out as well. You don't want to keep documents on file any longer than you absolutely have to, because then you're not drowning in that avalanche. But in the same token, what's your life cycle? What's the expectation? So for instance, if an incident is reported, what's the span until it's closed? Is that determined in your health and safety management system? And is it matched in your document management system? Do you have a responsibility and accountability framework? In other words, when you start your documentation trail, is there lists of responsibilities and accountabilities along the way? Are there triggers that will trigger other groups or people that might be attached to that document or may need to answer to something? Have that mapped out and make sure it's clear within your health and safety management system. And purposeful archiving, whether it be electronic or offsite storage, whatever the case may be, but make it purposeful. Now, the next piece I wanted to talk about is electronic data management. Now, I've recently been providing a lot of consultation services with an organization, and I just want to warn you right off the bat, they're not paying me for this. I just want to give them a bit of a shout out because the software that they use uses all of the principles that I've mentioned, and they're Wombat software. Yes, there'll be a link in the description. Really good organization, and they've gone and made a lot of inroads and a lot of innovations as far as data management goes, especially on the sides of things like training, validation of training, and triggers so that supervisors will know when training is up or more training is needed or certification has lapsed, etc. So I recommend that you check them out. Now, the other thing that you have to remember is that with all of this, risk management is one of the key factors that you want to look at and manage your risk accordingly. A lot of times people forget that their data, and when they're using it, helps them to manage risk. So have a look at this video up here, and it's going to talk about how to use your risk matrix as a decision-making process. And until we see each other again, and I really hope we do, don't just think about safety, don't just talk about safety, but be a safety influencer. Be a leader and provoke safety wherever you are. Okay? Take care. See ya. Bye for now.